For the first time in more than 50 years, a spacecraft launch is being prepared to send people around the moon. The Artemis 2 rocket, which will look like this Artemis 1 test flight from 4 years ago, will take off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida sometime in early 2026, carrying 4 astronauts who will fly 250,000 miles away from Earth as they orbit one time around the moon and then head back to Earth. As this is a test flight, NASA will make sure all the systems are working before it allows the rocket to be launched. The crew of 4 people will include the first female, the first person of color, and the first Canadian to fly to the moon. The desire to put people on the moon so that they could explore and try to learn more about the origins of both the moon and the Earth has been going on for more than 60 years. In early 1961, there were 2 rockets launched halfway around the world from each other that brought tension to the world. On April 12th, the Soviet Union launched Yuri Gagarin into outer space, where he did a single orbit around the Earth. Less than a month later, on May 5th, the United States sent Alan Shepard into low Earth orbit. Both rocket launches proved that the countries could put men in space and bring them safely back. These launches were the result of a great rocket competition that had grown between the United States and the Soviet Union following World War II. Once both countries believed they could safely send people into outer space, they did so with Gagarin and Shepard.
After that, their next goal was to be the first country to land men on the moon and return them safely to Earth.
At that time, the United States was slightly behind in the space race in terms of capabilities and knowledge of spaceflight, but our country really wanted to win the space race, and in September 1962, President John F. Kennedy inspired our nation to do just that.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
People thought Kennedy's speech was crazy because at that time, the United States had barely been into space, and there would be so much that would need to be learned. Technologies needed to be invented, people would have to prove that they could endure the rigors of outer space, and mathematics to create a flight path to the moon and back would have to be developed. And they ultimately would have to develop new systems, new hardware, new software that they hadn't even imagined to invent the world's largest rocket ship, which you can see here. It is a Saturn V rocket, and it stood just over 350 feet long. It had to be big enough and powerful enough to get all the equipment and men to the moon and back safely. Getting to the moon became a national goal that had more than 400,000 people working on related projects from all 50 of the United States. There were 3 phases of the United States program to get the men on the moon. The first was Project Mercury, which used a relatively small rocket and a single-person capsule to prove that the United States could launch men into orbit, circle the Earth multiple times, and return back safely to a specific spot in an ocean where a ship would pick them up once they splashed down. After launching about 20 unmanned test flights, Project Mercury had 6 successful manned flights. The second phase was called Project Gemini, which used larger rockets with bigger 2-person capsules. The purpose of that phase was to prove that men could stay in space for 2 weeks or more, to work outside in the cold void of outer space, and to try to rendezvous 2 spaceships and have them dock together, which would need to be done if they were to reach the moon. There were 2 unmanned and 12 manned Gemini launches. The third phase was the Apollo program, which featured the world's largest rocket, a command module that could carry 3 people, and a lunar module that could carry 2 people. The lunar module was a spaceship that would travel with the command capsule all the way to the moon, and then with 2 of the 3 astronauts going into lunar module, it would go down and land on the moon's surface while the space capsule continued to fly around the moon. There were 3 unmanned flights and 4 manned Apollo test flights used by NASA to be ready to land men on the moon, and that finally came with Apollo 11 on July 1969. The first 2 people to walk on the moon were Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There were 6 more missions to the moon. The missions became longer and more advanced. They had a little vehicle like a space golf cart that they could drive quite a distance away from the lunar module so that they could explore, take pictures, and take rock samples as they tried to gather evidence on how the moon was formed. Following the Apollo program, which ended in 1972, NASA and the Soviet Union put up a joint temporary laboratory called Space Lab. It was then replaced by the International Space Station. The first part of the space station was sent into orbit in 1998. Astronauts, men and women, have been living up there ever since as the size has expanded as additional modules were sent up to it. For most of the life of the space station, NASA had vehicles called space shuttles, like the Atlantis space shuttle that is pictured here, which could take astronauts to and from the space station, along with a lot of supplies and other items like the Hubble Space Telescope. But the Space Shuttle program concluded in 2011, and since then it has been private companies that have sent space capsules like this Dragon space capsule to the International Space Station to take people and supplies up and back. The space station is getting old now, and NASA plans to discontinue using it by the year 2030. Meanwhile, NASA has turned its attention once again to going to the moon and then to Mars. We know a lot about Mars because we have sent a number of unmanned space probes there that have been able to analyze soil, look for signs of water, and performed numerous scientific tests. But robots cannot perform additional experiments and ask questions and seek answers like men and women. The ultimate goal is to be able to send people to Mars and have them live on the planet for some time. That will be a challenge because Mars is about 141 million miles away, and it takes 6 to 9 months to get there, and it even takes 3 to 22 minutes for messages on Earth to be sent to Mars. Once at Mars, NASA believes it will use equipment like this rover to not only be a vehicle that will let them drive around, but also includes a science lab for conducting experiments. It is estimated that NASA might make it to Mars by the late 2030s or early 2040s. Being on the moon helped us learn that the moon most likely came to be from debris left over after a Mars-sized object struck Earth, that the craters are from asteroids, that the moon is roughly the same age as Earth, which is 4.5 billion years old. Going to the moon also saw inventions in computing and miniaturization and laser ranging, which is where one can measure the distance of one object, like the moon, to another object, like Earth. The moon exploration also helped create fly-by-wire systems which modern airplanes of today use. Working on the International Space Station has helped us know that people can survive for long periods in space if muscle atrophy, bone loss, and radiation risks are managed. The space station's zero gravity led to the successful 3D bioprinting of human tissues for knees and the heart. The space station also brought on advances in robotics and automated docking, as well as in water purification and environmental systems. Going back to the moon will help us be able to learn how to set temporary structures and live there for periods of time, just as people have lived for a year or more on the International Space Station. And by going to Mars, NASA hopes to search for signs for other life in the universe, to understand planetary evolution, and secure humanity's long-term future as a multi-planetary species.
Well, the personal exploration of space has been to learn about outer space and where the moon and Earth has come from.
Society has benefited from the development of new technologies for space exploration. These technologies have led to the development of products that we can use here on Earth. Here are just a few of the things that we now use as a result of the space program.
The human spirit has always had inquisitive minds, wanting to learn and experience things firsthand. And soon, we'll be sending people up to experience the moon, and then at some point Mars. And what will really be cool for the rest of us is that unlike the grainy black and white pictures from the 1960s and the space adventures to the moon then, this time we should be able to watch the action of the astronauts in high definition TV, making us feel like we are part of the adventure. I can't wait.